than some people viewing them might like. Today's session is focusing on 24 paths to peace. We will get to that and begin to discuss those issues in about 5 to 10 minutes. This is the beginning of our 80 minutes together, where I can ask the question, is there anything you want to talk about? Which is an invitation to clear up some questions or confusion from previous sessions. In our last session last week, we focused on defining nonviolence, peace, and peace studies. In the session before that, we spent some time discussing at least 9 different views of human nature. So we are covering a fair which is tomorrow. We will begin discussing Gandhi, his youth, and the various influences upon his youth tomorrow. And then we will have a month focusing on Gandhi and his idea system. Then we will have another month focusing on Martin Luther King and his idea system. And as all of you know, I'm saying this for the record, we will be finishing this course on April 5th, the day after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr.
Please stand clear of the doors.
Okay, I'll try to stand clear of the doors, whatever that means. So, today, a few minutes for questions. We get into 24 different paths for peace. And tomorrow, we get into Gandhi. There will, of course, be time for discussion today. And I look forward to seeing you more. When it comes to seeing you, at this moment, only a few of you who are visible to me. If your technology allows, please do let me see your faces, because then I can see if I'm communicating. Otherwise, I'm just speaking into the darkness. And I would like to have actual human beings. Thank you so much. I also noticed that in the recordings, your pictures do not appear unless you yourselves are asking a question or speak. I don't want that to be a discouragement to you, but I want you to be aware that you are being recorded visually unless you are speaking. So if you desire to ask a question or say something and not be seen on the recording, all you need to do is become invisible to me. Just take off your picture and then you can speak. Okay? This is called privacy, and I want you to be aware of what you can do to maintain your privacy. Good? All right. So is there anything you want to discuss a little bit before we get into paths for peace? Yes, please. I see one hand.
Yes, I do have a question. It's not about last time, but it's about a general question. If it's okay at this place?
Of course.
Okay, great. So in Germany, there are elections in 3 weeks, and campaigns are happening now. And last Saturday, the AfD, the far-right party, held a campaign event, and there were some protests happening, and like around 1,000 people. They did blockades. They blocked the entrance of the doors, and so they did not want the speech to happen. And my question is, like, and it was effective. Like the speech was delayed, and not many people did see it. And the question is what Gandhi and or what King would say to this kind of civil disobedience. If it's the right way of doing it, or is it effective in the long term? To the question.
All right. Well, of course, the context you are speaking of are the German elections in Germany.
Mhm.
And the controversy largely relates to a very right-wing party who is trying to make Germany great again from their own point of view. Yes?
Mhm.
An anti-immigrant party, very much like Donald Trump in the United States. Uh, I believe that Gandhi himself was a firm believer in freedom of speech and expression for both himself and all others. That means that it's important to hear all of the blind people who are touching the elephant. That analogy we gave in the past relating to people all having different points of view, we will discuss it as the doctrine of Antikantavada, the many-sidedness of truth, means that even Adolf Hitler needs to be listened to, even Mussolini, even Trump. The people that we might most strongly disagree with need to be able to speak and be listened to. If we seek to silence them as they would want to silence us, are we not becoming part of the problem? That's the question I would raise, and I think Gandhi would raise the same question. That is not to say that speech cannot be fought with speech. Yes? So if someone is speaking that I find very disturbing, I can certainly have a protest and organize even civil disobedience, not to protest their speech, but to speak against them. In other words, fighting speech with speech. That can, of course, become like shouting the person down. I will be so loud that no one can hear you. Well, that spirit is not a spirit of nonviolence. That attitude is not an attitude of community. It is understandable that people would be angry with Nazis or neo-Nazis speaking. I myself would be protesting. And it is for the people themselves to decide how they protest. Gandhi is not going to dictate strategy. He believes every person, every group, knows their own reality best, and they need to decide what nonviolence means for them, and then seek to practice it as best they can. So he does not condemn protesters who might be protesting in a way he sees as less than ideal. You understand? He will respect them also and their right to decide their own tactics. That sounds contradictory, but for me, simply, there is no absolute truth that we can claim to know now. Absolute truth exists, as we will see beginning on Saturday. But while we are living, we all have only a part of the truth. And none of us should be silencing not only our opponents, but we shouldn't be silencing our friends who may be protesting in ways that we might not fully agree with. It is important to respect expression. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, of course, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I myself don't like to shout. I don't like myself personally to be chanting slogans. That's not my personal preference for protesting. I prefer music. I prefer humor. I prefer being assertive and visually present. But I don't like to be appearing offensive. That is my personal preference. And if I organize a protest, I will have certain guidelines, which are Gandhian guidelines, which would guide my activity. But in the United States, most people do not follow Gandhian guidelines. They are far more offensive in the way they undertake protest. And I need to have some respect for that because that is their choice. Complicated. But thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you for the answer. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Amit.
I just want to share or add something because it's a very common discussion in Germany, and we also hear from friends who do not agree with the view of far right, and people sometimes use this logic that the far right is doing saying a lot of things that are inhuman, etc., etc. But agreeing to Michael's way, Bennett, I would also say that the Constitution of Germany has tools to tackle hate speech. If somebody is saying something that is beyond the political view, then there are instruments available. So one should also try to resort or use those instruments. But my personal experience is that our commitment for a political change is very short, and it's easy to go to a demo and shout at another side and then just go back to the party. We don't want to devote our life thinking that politics, the so-called democratic societies that we live in, it requires everyday work. Like we breathe, we drink, and every day there has to be a political participation. It's not one day thing. So when we look at this as a long term, then it's okay. One can still remain calm. But when it's like, okay, I only have a Sunday to go, and the short way is, okay, I go and shout and try to silence. Doesn't make a society that we want to live in. And also, I would highlight the role of media. Sometimes media also tries to black out certain view. But you see, this is exactly the same problem. Just because right now it is happening in our favor, we like it, but it would also happen someday against us. So the media needs to do what a media, independent media or neutral media is supposed to report. They're not, it's about news, it's not about views. So they have no right to boycott anybody. I mean, of course, they should not be broadcasting hate speech because that's against the constitutional framework of speech. But yeah, so Bennett, yeah.
I think whenever I organize a demonstration, and I am a compulsive organizer and have engaged in many, both legal and non-legal demonstrations, I always first think, what is the headline I want to see in the newspapers? What is the image I want to see on the television? And then I work backwards. I try to strategize to control the narrative. Does that make sense? I want to be effective in getting the message out that I want to see. And for me, the message is not me shouting at other people who are shouting. The image is more, here is me, a reasonable person, raising serious concerns about people who are engaged in hating other people. If I hate the people who hate the people, then that is a confusing message for the public. How am I any better than those people I am protesting against.
Yeah, I often use this analogy that if you want to remove the fire, you cannot use the fire to remove the fire. And Bennett, there was once a big demonstration in here in Erfurt, and I, along with some other friends, we took a third position. We were neither, of course, not in support of this demo because it was a lot of far right stereotype, factless narrative, but the other side was also shouting. So I, along with some other friends, we went to the center. I took a board and I said, "Okay, I don't want you to fight on my existence here. Maybe we can talk." And the best thing here is that the police was really relieved because it was so much stress for the state to organize a peaceful demonstration where a clash doesn't happen. So, and also, like, sometimes we make the same mistake. Like, one group is saying that those immigrants, so it's a generalizing of millions of people, and then we start to do, oh, those far right. It's reality is never a static block. And once we organized kind of a an action, so we took some flour and we took a little board like a free hug, and I and another friend, we went to this other side of far right wing, and we just met them and we asked them, "Hey, what are you opposing here?" And you would be surprised to know several of them say, "Oh, this is against USA and this is against this." People didn't know they have been brought here by telling some anything, and we think all these 100% people are against a certain idea. So it's very fragile. We can for sure try to have a conversation. Sometimes it could be really difficult, but that's where the test is. How much am I committed, and my commitment to non-violence and trying to implement it. Sometimes there are tough times.
So there are no easy answers to these questions, but let us develop our own values. If we have our own moral compass, that is really what this course is trying to encourage. To develop a moral compass for yourself that can guide and answer your own questions, guide you in responding to others. Let us be the change we want to see in the world. But first, we need to understand what we want to be. Yes? Have our own moral compass. And you will be seeing what my moral compass is, but that is not what your moral compass needs to be. You will see that Gandhi and King have differences of opinion and different strategies. You can pick and choose what makes sense to you. But it is very important for you and everyone else who may be listening to this session to be aware that you need to make your own choices. You need to have your own compass that will guide you in answering, do I shout? Do I shout back? How do I demonstrate? Do I hate the hater? And these are important questions. I have my views, but you need to have your views. Thank you again for letting me see your faces, because I can see some of you being more expressive than others, and I appreciate your willingness to engage. Yes. Now, let us go ahead and move into the content for the day. We've taken 20 minutes rather than 10, but it's very important to look at current events, because this is where we see what we may be talking about being relevant or not. Now, thank you for putting up the paths to peace. First thing, let me say that this is my list. It has come from years of reflection. There are 6 different categories There could be 7, there could be 10. You can create your own way of looking at this. But for me, it's plenty complicated to look at 6 different paths and 4 different paths within each of those major categories. And you can see that on the screen, you can take a screenshot, anybody, if you want to see how I have put things together. But there are military paths, economic, diplomatic, nonviolent direct action, what I describe as self-expression, and passivity. I know that sounds very strange, but there are passive, very passive paths to peace, including conflict avoidance, which a great many of us use most of the time. So let us look at each of these a little, and I suspect that it will promote a good deal of discussion for the final time we have together today. Let me warn you in ahead of time, of course, that this course is primarily focusing on category 4 and primarily looking at nonviolent resistance and soul force. And that will be, of course, not so much focused on today, because that will be focused on for about 2 months worth of our sessions. So, number 1, military. In our last session, we described that peace is thought of in negative terms, not war. And especially when you're looking at peace as not war, military paths to peace are prominent. One is unlimited offensive ability. What does that mean? Well, that means that first it may include nuclear, chemical, biological warfare. What? That's a path to peace? Isn't that a path to annihilation? Well, maybe, except the logic is deterrence. I am going to scare the crap out of you by having 4,000 nuclear warheads that can destroy the entire world. Yes, it might be mutually assured destruction. It might be mad at you, but you will be crazy to start a nuclear war because you know I will destroy the world in responding to you. So we will have a balance of terror. A balance of terror will be a path to peace. Nuclear deterrence will be, logically, the way we maintain not going to war. We all know this argument, yes? And a great many people in the world, of course, accept it. Unlimited offense may also be undertaken by people who don't have such powerful weapons. It can also be used by guerrilla fighters who are fighting either to liberate their country or to defend it from those who are invading. People like Che Guevara, who is well known in many circles and highly respected, believed in a guerrilla warfare mode of revolution. He would not fight fairly. He would not go up against a superior military force face to face because the other side has more firepower. He would hit and run. He would strategically engage. Now, most people who believe in unlimited offensive strategy, whether that's weapons of mass destruction or whether it's more guerrilla warfare, They do have morals. They are guided by the hope that what they are doing will bring about a just balance of power, a just peace. They just do not often see alternatives. They are like a blind man and the elephant, yes? They see what mostly their environment has encouraged them to see. They don't believe that nonviolent action in the tradition of a Gandhi or King would be effective. So they, perhaps blindly, like all of us are blind in different ways, hold firm to what they think is true. Other military people will focus on conventional offensive capacity. That means they do not want nuclear weapons or chemical biological weapons of mass destruction. They want to fight as regular soldiers. And it may be offensive because you may want to strike the opponent first before they have a chance to strike you. This is the logic, in a sense, of Israel striking Syria after their recent revolution. Syria had not struck Israel, but Israel hit military targets within Syria in hopes that that offensive action would prevent future war. Please understand, I'm not justifying Israel's actions. What I'm saying is very simple, that they may very well have been acting in a way they believe to be best. Because, like the rest of us, they are blind in different ways. In this case, they may be blinded by the fact that in past wars, Syria has engaged in actions against them. And so they are being influenced by their own experience to hit first and ask questions later. Conventional defensive is much more defensive. That is, it is like having a National Guard armed, ready to fight with military weapons, but not structured in an offensive way. A conventional defensive strategy would be something like Switzerland has. In the country of Switzerland, virtually everyone in the country knows how to use rifles and weapons, yes? It's a very decentralized system. They are not equipped to invade other countries, but if other countries invade them, they can fight, and make it incredibly difficult for anyone to control them. It's a very decentralized military strategy. And most countries in the past few hundred years have not sought to control Switzerland because it would simply be too great a cost to try. The Swiss are set up to make it almost impossible for anyone to control their country militarily. They have the advantage of mountains, but again, they can strike any invader until the invader is simply worn out. It becomes far too expensive for any invader to try to control the country. It is a military strategy to peace. And then, of course, unconventional defensive would be kind of like almost Switzerland, a decentralized guerrilla sort of defense against an invader. There's a fine line between that sort of military, unconventional defensive strategy and Gandhi. As we will see, Gandhi's vision is an unconventional defensive nonviolent strategy. Gandhi wanted to, as we will see later in the course, have in India of what was then 400,000 villages, and is now more like 600,000 or 800,000 villages, but each village self-sustaining in their basic needs, able to feed themselves, clothe themselves, can take care of their own needs. And in that sort of decentralized structure, somewhat similar to Switzerland, Gandhi would have nonviolent soldiers confronting invaders, soldiers without weapons, who would greet the Japanese, for example, during World War II, maybe meet them at the edge of the village with coffee and tea and cookies. Greet the invaders with kindness. Show them respect. Make it difficult for any soldier occupying India to obey their orders. Gandhi's sort of nonviolent, unconventional defense has military aspects because it requires people to be very disciplined. It requires the system to be very decentralized and self-sufficient, and then resist an invader in a comprehensive way. The invader would not be able to control only Delhi and Kolkata and Mumbai and declare victory. They would have to simultaneously control 400,000 villages, each of them able to mount a nonviolent civil disobedience campaign against the invader. Can you see how that sort of vision of Gandhi, which borrows in many ways from an unconventional defensive military strategy, how that would make it very difficult for an invader to control the country, and it would be extremely expensive for the Japanese or anyone else to occupy India against India's will. It would just not be economically expensive, it would also be expensive with morale. Because when you are being kind to your opponent, is the opponent more or less likely to follow their orders and arrest you or kill you or shoot you into mass graves? If you are kind to the opponent, the intention is psychologically to encourage the opponent's soldiers to refuse to obey their orders. And Gandhi understood that if you can get an opponent, an occupying military force, to disobey their orders, the entire power structure collapses. The Japanese emperor, Adolf Hitler, Mussolini, whoever you might think of, has no power if their soldiers refuse to obey their orders. Gandhi's unconventional, nonviolent defensive strategy is like guerrilla warfare, only with nonviolence. And it is psychological, targeting the opponent not to take their lives, but to destroy their morale with kindness. Think about that, whether that makes any sense at all. Let's go on to economic paths to peace. In that category, we have economic nationalism. Some of
Michael,
you...
can I
Yes.
just ask one question? Could you give me a little more of the third one, conventional defensive?
Well, conventional defensive would be like Switzerland. A very, very decentralized military force perhaps a national guard of some kind, that is not prepared to invade other countries, but is only prepared to respond to invasion. That is, it is defensive, heavily armed, and very decentralized. And by the way, it works pretty well.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Hitler did not try to control Switzerland. It would have been. Switzerland was neutral, but basically it was neutral because everyone knew that they would be met with guns in the arms of a highly trained civilian population that would cost a great deal militarily if they tried to control. Are there other questions about are there other comments about military paths?
Nilu Khosla, can you please mute your... Yeah, thank you.
I'm hoping to stimulate some thinking, and you notice I have brought in Gandhi. He does not advocate a military path to peace, but he borrows from it in his own vision of a nonviolent, unconventional, defensive strategy. He listens to the military. Yes? He doesn't hate the military. He admires many soldiers who are military, who are willing to die for what they believe. He simply wants soldiers, Gandhi wants soldiers who are not willing to kill for what they believe. But we need soldiers who are willing to die, who have discipline, who are willing to fight using nonviolent weapons. Massive non-cooperation, civil disobedience, refusal to pay taxes, all of these things are in the arsenal of the nonviolent soldier. Shall we move along a little? Economic paths to peace, each of these we could spend an entire session on. But economic nationalism is advocated by Donald Trump, and I would suggest is also being used by China today. It was used by the British during the times of the British Empire. Economic nationalism is China first, America first, Britain first. What does that mean? It means that what is good for the British East India Company is good for Britain. And Great Britain, in the time that they had much of control of the world, they used their military force to support their corporation, the British East India Company, a private corporation with private profits, but supported by the nation's military. India was largely made a colony of Britain, not because Britain wanted to politically control the world. They wanted profit. And the British East India Company, the British determined, was in India, which was a far too unstable multicultural environment for them to make good money. So Britain came in to control India politically and militarily to support their corporation, to support their way of life, extracting raw materials from wherever they were, manufacturing products in Britain, which then would be exported for profit. It was a system of exploitation with Britain first. Let me suggest to you that economic nationalism was not just British. It is also very much advocated by Donald Trump, and we see it coming out in the world today. And it is also, I would suggest, largely advocated by China. And they're wanting to have avenues for commerce depending upon them, the Chinese, throughout the world. The Chinese may say they want free trade, but primarily they want to control trade in favor of their own economic benefit. Economic internationalists, the second category there under the economic path, they are advocates of free trade. Let us take back and down the barriers between countries so that goods and services can freely flow back and forth from the Gambia to Senegal, from Senegal to Libya, from Libya to Italy, around the world. We need free trade. No tariffs, no non-tariff barriers, no quotas, nothing to restrict trade. And the dream of the economic internationalists is that trade itself will breed a greater interdependence among countries. So as we become dependent upon one another for our resources and for our parts, for our automobiles, we will not go to war with them because that disrupts the supply chain. In a sense, we are bound together by an economic free trade reality. Many free traders, including, let's say, Joe Biden and Barack Obama, believe that free trade will bring peace to the world. Sadly, it also dramatically increases destruction throughout all of that aid and all of the fuel used to transport strawberries and fruit from Chile to the United States. All of that trade creates a tremendous amount of stress on the environment and is leading dramatically to global warming and climate change. But hey, you can't have everything. Every path has its problems. I don't know. Economic structuralism is fair trade. It's a more European idea that wants to have trade across countries with the same dream that they will be interdependent and eventually will not make war against each other. France and Germany will not make war because they're part of the European Union, a free trade zone. They become interdependent with each other, and that makes war between, let's say, Germany and France largely a thing of the past. Well, the Europeans, say, are calling themselves fair traders. The difference is, under economic structuralism, the fair traders want to structure in agreements for trade before the trade barriers are reduced. So in other words, they want to have agreements on environmental protection, agreements on child labor and not using it, agreements on human rights. They want to have these agreements before we lower the barriers that allow goods and services to cross the country's boundaries. The free traders are happy to have the free trade and not have those restraints. Environmental protection, child labor, protection of women. They're willing to have those come later, maybe. Fair traders want to have the agreements first with the trade barriers reduced afterwards. Economic empowerment, as we will see, is more Gandhian. It's not just Gandhi. The economic empowerment advocates believe that economics can be a path to peace if we have decentralized control, where villages, as I mentioned before, might be largely self-sufficient in India, or communities in Germany would be largely self-sufficient, producing their own electricity, producing their own food, so that you have a decentralized structure where people are empowered to control their own policies at the local level. Economic empowerment feeds nicely into the idea of a potential nonviolent national defense, because it would be decentralized economy, decentralized military, if you have a Switzerland model, or a decentralized nonviolent national defense if your soldiers are unarmed with weapons. But decentralization is the key to empowerment. And so they are, in a sense, the opposite of economic nationalists, and yet they are similar in a way that the economic nationalist wants to put their nation first. Economic empowerment advocates, in a sense, put their neighborhood at the center of the stable system. So we think globally and act locally. Economic empowerment is more green, kind of green political party, green movement. Diplomacy, we mostly already have some idea of, but I'm moving too quickly, perhaps. Does anyone want to make some comments about economic paths to peace?
Yes, right. Please unmute yourself.
Am I muted?
Yes.
Yes,
Bhavita.
Sir, I have a confusion.
God bless it.
Am I audible, sir?
I am having trouble.
Am I audible?
You are audible, yes.
Michael,
Me?
you are also audible. You are not mute. Harshal was only asking Rahik to unmute him. Yeah, it's all good now.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Well, I was thinking, wow, I've been talking for 10 minutes and no one could hear me.
Okay.
That wasn't the
That would be
case.
funny.
We could
By the
hear
way,
you, yeah.
if that ever happens, you need to say something. So, you can
Yes,
see that
Professor Michael,
yes.
you very deliberately explained economic path or economic strategy for peace. I have a little confusion regarding to economic nationalism. Of course, economic internationalism, economic structuralism, and economic empowerment. I can convince myself that they have some. They are related to somehow to peace, especially whenever we are speaking about global peace. But in the case of economic nationalism, for example, when the Trump says that America first or China first or someone else says that we are the first, so it is that it is somehow echoing the national or the selfishness. So when you speak about your country, just about your country, about your interest, how do you relate? How do you, for example, think that the peace will come? Especially, for example, if we speak about the case of Israel and Palestine, no? Israel says that we Palestine has to obey their orders, and on the other hand, Palestine argue the same. So it means that they think about themselves like economic nationalists, as you mentioned. The question here is, how do you relate economic nationalist or economic nationalism as a kind of strategy for peace, especially when we speak about global peace?
Okay, well, Reza, in some ways, this goes back to human nature, what your view of human nature is. If I would suggest Donald Trump would say, it's a dog-eat-dog world, Michael. You need to be the top dog. If you don't want to be eaten, you need to be willing to eat others. That's human nature. We are selfish, Reza. We're selfish, competitive individuals. There would be chaos among the world's nations unless there is a top dog. And if there is a dominant power, it might be the British, it could be the Roman Empire, it could be the British, it could be anybody. But of course, British rule over much of the world was good for the British, not good for the United States. We had to rebel. Now the United States needs to be the top. Somebody needs to be the top dog. Someone needs to put the fear into all others to not engage in war. This view of economic nationalists and human nature logically does make some sense if you think about it, that I should celebrate my power, and you should be celebrating my power, because I will keep India and Pakistan from going to war with each other. I will keep Ukraine and Russia from carrying on the war. I will solve the problem in the Middle East by making Gaza the Riviera of the Mediterranean. Yes, it sounds very selfish. But that's the nature of the world, Reza. Gandhi would say, no, it's not. Human beings are not inherently selfish. And as you say, Mr. Trump, you've got it wrong. So there are going to be disagreements on the very assumption level of human nature. Some of the blind men touching the elephant will have a view of human nature that says unlimited offensive capacity is necessary. Nuclear warfare is needed to be able to threaten it to keep the peace. Economic nationalism will make America first, but when America is first, the dollar will stabilize the economic currencies of the entire world and everybody will benefit. It is one blind person's point of view. I suggest to you that we need to understand it and also understand our own blindness to be able to see the whole elephant more clearly. It doesn't do me any good to hate Donald Trump or to hate economic nationalism. It does me good to understand it so as potentially to learn a little from it, so as to have a different vision, which I believe is a far more stable peace that can be produced. Does that make sense, Reza? It's very difficult to understand things from different people's points of view. But I think that is required for anyone who is seeking to understand Gandhi, particularly Gandhi's view of the multi-sidedness of truth. We are getting close to our discussion time, but you can see the logic of these 24 paths to peace. There are different kinds of diplomatic action, from local level police and mediation to international law and international organizations enforcing the peace through international law. Many people will have great faith in the International Criminal Court of Justice, the ICCJ, to bring about enforcement of rules of war, as well as prevention of genocide. Again, Gandhi will be critical of that more because he doesn't believe so much in centralized power as a mechanism for bringing greater peace. Martin Luther King will have a little more sympathy because King is trying to enforce laws, and by logic would want to have a much more powerful United Nations that would be able to enforce peace throughout the world. Maybe abolish nuclear weapons, or have the only nuclear weapons that exist in the hands of the United Nations.
Yes,
these are
Professor.
our view. Yes.
I have a question, please.
Yes, yes.
I'm not sure if my video is fine. I don't know what is it.
Ah, you're here. Good to see you, Mumbai.
Oh, okay. You can see me?
I can see you.
Very well. Yes, my question now is in relation to this topic of discussion this afternoon. How those our principles, our practices commensurate in the attainment of peace? As well, how do we merge a country's peacefulness? What are the yardstick being used in the attainment of peace for a particular country or countries? Thank you.
Well, I think this goes back to our short discussion regarding positive and negative peace. Certainly, most military paths to peace have as the objective not war. And it's not to abolish war, it's simply not to have war now, perhaps not to have war next year. It's often a very short-term perspective. But very few human beings are completely psychotic, murdering characters. They do want peace. Even Adolf Hitler wanted a peace that would last 10,000 years. A peace, of course, with superior blonde, blue-eyed Nazis controlling the world. But it's still peace. It's not war. And so I think it's important to realize that if we define peace in positive ways, as we did in the previous session, the presence of respect for oneself and respect for others, remember? The presence of an economically equitable system where the rich and the poor do not have a huge gap in terms of their ways of living. And 3, economic interdependence, symbiosis. If we have peace defined positively, respect, equity, functional interdependence, then some of these other paths to peace don't make as much sense. They are more looking at peace as a negative, not war, not conflict, not...
Let me interject. So
yes.
Again, most often than not, we talk about positive and negative peace. In other words, do we have anything like neutral peace, if that exists?
Well, it's hard to be neutral, completely neutral. Switzerland tries to be politically neutral, and they have been for 300 years. And yet they have not stopped war all around them. And in an interconnected world, I would suggest to you it's not really possible to be neutral because, as Martin Luther King would say, and did say, whatever affects one directly affects everyone indirectly. You cannot be entirely separate from the rest of the world today. Maybe you could, 2,000 years ago, when the people in France didn't hardly even know that China existed. Maybe, but now we know each other. We are interdependent. Communications and modern technology has us unable to be so ignorant. And whatever affects one directly will affect everyone indirectly in terms of climate. Just pure climate. It's a closed environmental system. How can you be entirely neutral when it comes to climate? If the United States and China continue to consume incredible amounts of fossil fuels, China now is number one in producing carbon dioxide. The United States is still number one in producing methane. Methane as a greenhouse gas is much worse than carbon dioxide. How can I have China or America first, and I produce greenhouse gases? I'm trying to be neutral? Well, what I do in the United States is going to affect the Gambia. It's going to affect penguins in Antarctica. It's going to affect everyone globally because it affects worldwide climate. I would suggest to you that there's really not a neutral position. But I don't want to be political. I don't want to be political. I don't want to take sides. Fine. But the odd thing is, if you don't vote, for example, you're voting. What do you mean? What do you mean? If you don't vote in a democratic sort of system in elections, in Germany, for example, if you don't vote, you let those who vote make the decisions. If half the country doesn't vote, which is pretty close to the truth in the United States, 35% of voters last November did not vote at all. Donald Trump won the presidency with 49% of the 65% of the people who voted. He won the presidency with only about 30% of the population supporting him. Where is the neutrality? To not be political, and in a sense, is to be political. It is a political choice. And it is a choice that allows for those who do vote or who are active change agents to have their way. They will make the policies.
So where these differences lies in a democracy, how do you reconcile this in order to be able to attain peace?
Well, if there is the right to vote, I suggest we use it. Donald Trump would not have been elected if 95% of the population of the United States had voted. By the way, 95% of the population of Australia does vote. Did you know that? They have an extremely high voter turnout. If 95% of the people in the United States had voted last November, that means those who are among the least likely to vote, the poor, racial minorities, non-white people, urban dwellers, if they had voted in larger numbers, Kamala Harris would have won the election. That's simply a fact. That was not Mr. Trump's base of support. But when non-white people, poor people, and a great many people living in cities did not vote, that gave the path forward for Donald Trump. Now, I would suggest to you it's not just about voting. Though we can couch it in that term. Henry David Thoreau, the American writer of an essay on civil disobedience. Henry David Thoreau, who was one person who was known to Gandhi, though let's say Gandhi read Thoreau's essay on civil disobedience while Gandhi was already in jail. So he wasn't really influenced by Thoreau, but he was persuaded by Thoreau's arguments. Thoreau would say, cast your whole vote. What do you mean, Henry David Thoreau? What is your whole vote? Thoreau was saying, it's not a matter of the ballot box. That is simply election day. Even if you don't have an election day, even if you're not living in a democratic system, cast your whole vote. What is your whole vote? It is your body. It is the way you behave every day. That is what Thoreau was talking about. And Gandhi wasn't simply talking about voting in a democratic system. He was the whole vote. Live as you would have the entire world live. Cast your whole vote. In Thoreau's time, back in the 1840s, there was a war with Mexico. The United States was called the Mexican-American War. And the United States physically seized 1/3 of the territory of Mexico and made it part of the future United States. That's where the United States gets New Mexico, Arizona, even California was indirectly a result of the Mexican War. When the Mexican War of 1848 was taking place, Henry David Thoreau refused to pay taxes. He basically said, this is not my war. I will not pay for it. And he was arrested for refusing to pay taxes for the war. And Thoreau's position was very simple. I am casting my whole vote. No. No to the Mexican War. Now you can throw me in jail. If others refuse to pay their taxes, you can throw them in jail. If enough of us refuse to pay our taxes, there will be no war because you will have no money to pay your soldiers. If each of us cast our whole vote, as Thoreau would say, as Gandhi would say, we can abolish that war. Well, what about slavery, Thoreau? What about slavery? Are you going to end slavery? Thoreau said, yes. How are you going to end slavery in 1848? How are you going to do that? Thoreau responds by saying, I will have no slaves. My refusal to have slavery is the abolition of slavery in a small way. I am being the change I want to see in the world. If enough of us say we will have no slaves, slavery as an institution will end.
But again, Professor, this is where my question goes back to, because like I first mentioned about practices and policies, you see, most often than not, in many of the times we talk about slavery, we talk about human rights, we talk about climate justice, we talk about a lot of other things that are of pertinent concern to humanity nowadays. They are just on paper, but the practices are completely different. So how do we reconcile these differences in order to be able to attain peace? Because in my opinion, this is where the problem lies. This is where we are fighting. This is why we are fighting. And it's the cause for which we are fighting a lot of times. Not myself as an individual, but physically fighting, I mean, but fighting about due causes that are happening, wrong, imprisonment. Like, for example, a lot of people are incarcerated wrongfully. How do we vindicate some of those individuals? Some people's rights are stripped of them. How do we get these kind of things reconciled in order to be able to attain peace? It's not just about the absence of war, but there are so many strips, there are so many strings tied to peace. And if one is losing, just like, for example, the musical instrument kora, which is a traditional instrument in the Gambia, we call it kora. It's you can find it out. So when you want to have a good tune of this kora, you must have to have all your strings tight. In addition, again, if you want to have peace, we must be able to put all the things necessary in the attainment of peace. It's not just about one item. For example, what we call fractals. It's not just about, because it's about a cycle. So how do we get all of these things moving and running in order to be able to realize peace that we're talking about? For example, the war in Congo right now, about 1 million of people already dead, and we're still counting. In Gaza, we are still counting. A lot of, in Ukraine, we are still counting. And many other, in Cote d'Ivoire, we are still counting, and many other parts of the world. So how do we reconcile some of these things so that we strip off those institutions and individuals that are causing such inhuman treatments? So this is where I come back again. The practices and the policies are different. Until and unless we're able to reconcile these two, there is going to be that difficulty of having peace around the world. So how do we reconcile these differences, in my opinion? In your opinion, please.
I think there is no easy answer. If you're asking a blind man, and I am blind, to tell other blind people what to do, this is not good. But I have enough insight. I'm not entirely blind. And you are not entirely blind. And so we are able to communicate with each other and potentially find a solution to move forward in any particular conflict situation. But it takes a lot of creativity. I'm not trying to avoid your question. It's just that there is no easy answer. Gandhi, in general, would say the revolution is within us. And we must first change ourselves to be able to change the world. And if we rule ourselves, no one else in the world can rule us. And that makes sense. On the other hand, Adolf Hitler, Mussolini, others exist. And they can be incredibly brutal and destructive. Gandhi, what do we do? And Gandhi would say, well, you must be willing to die in large numbers, resisting the evil. Well, that might not be entirely satisfactory to everyone. Martin Luther King, as we will see, had much more faith in power structures. He did believe that if you can change a national law and enforce the law, you can change behavior. And so King had more faith in power structures than Gandhi did. King would say things like, the law cannot make a person love me, but it can stop them from hanging me by the neck until I'm dead. We can outlaw lynching, and that's a step forward. And we can enforce that law. And we can have international laws against hanging people and capital punishment. We can have international laws against slavery. And we can enforce those if we have powerful, centralized international mechanisms. I personally think that both Gandhi and King may be right. That it's not just either or. That there may be a place for, and for me, an extremely important place, for the revolution within. On the other hand, there may be a place for laws and the enforcement of laws within a country or internationally to help bring about greater peace. That may seem to be a contradiction. But if I want to, I don't know what would be a good analogy. If I want to crack a nut to be able to sustain myself, I can try to crack that from the bottom only, squeeze it only from the bottom. I can try to from the top only, squeeze it from the top. Or I can try to crack the nut both from the top and bottom, both from Gandhi and King. I personally believe the problems of the world are so complicated and so severe today that I am willing to consider both bottom and top pressure to bring about change. But that's my personal view. You asked for it. And we are now out of our allotted time. I am willing to continue a short while if a few of you want to continue to ask questions and have some discussion. Like in most of our sessions, we will be incomplete. Time is limited, but I'm hoping that while we do not conclusively resolve all of your questions in any session, we can get your brains to work. And between now and tomorrow, you may have an active brain that helps you come to understandings that you didn't have before. And we can continue the discussion tomorrow if you like. Are there others who would like to say something today?
Okay. Hello, sir.
Yes, hello.
Okay.
Please unmute yourself and identify yourself.
Okay. I am Momodu Tijame.
Aha.
Talking about the economy and military. I think these are the most influential things that bring violence in the world. Like, I'm going to talk about the economic area, like the area, the country I'm from, Gambia. The economy is the cause of the violence in our country today. By looking at that area, currently deportation is signed between the Gambia government and German government. The German government has already fulfilled their part by giving some economy to the government of the Gambia, so the returnees can make the best use of that economy, develop themselves, and be self-independent. But to my disappointment, when those returnees are back, government will never give them nothing. And some will be here frustrated. In future, it creates violence because looting, killing, rampant of such many things in order for them to survive and make money. So for me, in my area, economy is the main point. If I told like what we are saying, the leaders, like the other speaker, if I told the paperwork is being put into practice, I think peace will reign in many countries. And may one country right now, like Burkina Faso, the president came through coup, but right now their economy and stabilization the country is creating impact because I'm following them. It's different from before. Like when the president is there, the country is, engaging in so many crimes. But today, what the president is doing is, to me, is fantastic because it's creating job employment, making local marketing. We have so many leaders in the Africa lack. That's why today economy is the biggest problem, crime in Africa, especially the country I am. Everybody wants to get rich. So the leaders also don't want to support the poor. So if that is continued, not in military area, but for us in Africa, economy is the violence to many, citizens. Everybody wants to get survive. The living condition or marketing is getting high. So I think the economy, like what the other speakers say, if I thought it being put into practice, violence will reduce in Africa and will be less independent. Like today, what Donald Trump said. Many people think he is bad, but to me, I support him because if you are self-independent, you can move your economy forward. But we rely so much in this Western. That's why today our continent in Africa, we are lacking back. And we have so many natural material resources that can help our movement of our continent to another level. So I really support Trump of his idea, cutting so many aids that will make Africans to rely on themselves. So that is what my point of stand is.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. And you know your reality better than I can or anyone else. You and the Gambia need to decide what is important, the way forward for the Gambia. You will find in this course that Gandhi will be advocating more for economic decentralized empowerment. Martin Luther King will be arguing more for the sort of European economic structuralism, fair trade. Those will be the two large focuses of the two people we will look at in this course. But you need to decide whether either of those visions make sense or perhaps some combination. But it's not about economic development. That's too vague. We need economic development. Okay, that doesn't tell me anything. The question is, what kind of economic development? Yes? And here, let me just say, one reason I have category 6, passivity, is that I think most of us too often engage in a passive path to peace. Either avoid conflict, which doesn't really resolve anything. Don't do anything because of apathy, knowing that there's a problem, but not doing anything about it because you don't feel empowered. Many of us use the passive approach, leave it to the experts. I just don't know enough about that. Leave it to Amit Leave it to Ali. Leave it to Reza to decide. They are the experts.
Yes.
The problem with leaving it to the experts is that, of course, you're surrendering your own power to those who you think know more. And then, of course, to me, it is very sad that oftentimes passivity involves waiting for salvation. What does that mean? Well, this world is too crazy. We need to wait for the second coming of Jesus. We need to wait for the last Imam. We need to wait for Kali, the destroyer of all evil, to return and begin the cycle of the worlds again. Too often, as we either choose or behave in a way that is passive, we contribute to the destruction of the world that we are seeing. We can avoid the conflict and have less stress personally. We can be apathetic and enjoy watching the US Super Bowl as our big event of the year. We can leave it to the experts, whether that's Joe Biden or Donald Trump. We don't care. We don't need to think about it. Just let them do what they need to do. Or we can wait, of course, for the salvation. And all of those do not help us address our personal responsibility to make the world a better place. It is maybe a path to personal peace, less stress, maybe leaving it to some experts like the current acting president of Bangladesh. Maybe that makes some sense in the short term. Yes? Muhammad Yunus. It's a good man. But in the long term, we need to take personal responsibility, or it is almost inevitable, I suggest, that whatever short-term peace we have will be passing. Justice will not be built by those who are depending upon others to build it. I believe we must try to build it ourselves. Let us be positive. We can be the change we want to see in the world. To a matter of degree, we may not be perfect, but we can be better. And we can be better tomorrow than we are today, and better next week than we are tomorrow. And we have some control over who we are. Even if I have very little control over what Donald Trump does or the Chinese leadership does, I can have some control over me. So let us focus on the positive if we can. I will look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and we will begin seriously to look into Gandhi's early life and what influenced him to become the sort of person that he became. See you tomorrow.